Hi everybody, Matt Bernier, joined by Dan Illman. Taking a look back at Saturday's Grade 1 Whitney from up at Saratoga. It was the main event of the day, and the main runner in the event was Gunrunner, the third highest rated horse in the world, second highest rated dirt horse in the world. He did not disappoint as they break from the gate. You're going to want to keep an eye on the number 3, Cautious Giant. He was entered for what everyone expected to be a rabbit's roll, and it out that way.
They must have thought that Cautious Giant could win because he is getting to the front. He gets to the front easy, and he just sets a rated pace like he's out there to win this race. And if you look at Cautious Giant on paper, he's not going to beat Gunrunner. Gunrunner, Florent Geroux took a left-handed look coming out of the gate and was like, what's happening here? Where's the rabbit? Where's the speed? I'll sit off this 62-1 no-hoper, going 23-4, 48-1. They're not going to beat me in that situation.
And at this point now, you've kind of compromised everyone else's opportunity as well, because you're going to see the number 2 horse Breaking Lucky in those West Point Silks. I kind of feel like Luis Contreras looked at it and said, we're going to have to take a shot at this horse. In fact, they do on the far turn, and unfortunately for the connections, it probably costs them second in this spot.
Everybody else was compromised too. Brutus, the number 4, who was a big speedball at sort of marathon distances, once he was asked to rate off these fractions behind Gunrunner, he wasn't going to win. Keen Ice, you see at the back of the pack, is completely compromised by pace. You're right about Breaking Lucky. This is what's known as doing dirty work. Gunrunner is setting sail for home, even with a horseshoe lodged in his tail. Breaking Lucky is actually working very hard. He gets within tailing distance of Gunrunner. They tried to win the race, and you could argue it cost them the place.
And the problem is, at this point, Florent Geroux is still in first gear aboard Gunrunner. At this point, he's going to just start pushing on him a little bit. You're going to get an instant sort of reaction on the far outside in those Donegal Silks. Here comes Keen Ice. You know that he's going to come with a late run. The problem is, when you spotted the main competition about 10 lengths, not going to make it up.
Gunrunner way more professional in the stretch run than we usually see him. Is usually hopping back onto his left lead when Geroux asks him for run. I wonder if it was because Flo didn't ask him right-handed this time. He popped him once left-handed to keep his mind on his business. But when Gunrunner stays straight and strong and on his right lead throughout the stretch after the trip he got here, they're not beating him. 112 Buyer's speed figure. The beat keeps marching on for Gunrunner. And if Arrogate stubs his toe again in the Pacific Classic, this is the new number 1 horse in North America.
Gunrunner wins the Grade 1 Whitney at odds of 3-5. He keys your exacta over Keen Ice. That comes back $9.50 for 2. Another gutsy effort from Breaking Lucky, probably slightly a notch or 2 below, but again, you can't take anything away from the horse. Let's talk about Gunrunner. Like you said, if we see some sort of a dull effort from Arrogate in the Pacific Classic in 2 weeks, you have to assume that this horse, trained by Steve Asmussen, ridden by Florent Geroux, owned by Winchell and Three Chimneys, he sort of takes over as the leading light in the Classic division.
And we're going to get another shot to see Gunrunner, it looks like, at Saratoga this summer. They're going to wheel him right back in the Woodward, and why not? 1 mile and an eighth is Gunrunner's game. I think the question, if Arrogate gets through the Pacific Classic, if Gunrunner gets through the Woodward, what happens at 1 mile and a quarter? Well, we saw what happens at 1 mile and a quarter in the Dubai World Cup. A tremendous advantage to Arrogate. Gunrunner reminds me of Medaglia d'Oro, who is a sensational 1 mile and an eighth horse and a very good 1 mile and a quarter horse. But it was much better at 1 mile and an eighth, and that might be the story as we get to Breeders' Cup Classic time.
This was his second start since coming back from Dubai. It sounds like if they go to the Woodward, they would train him up to the Breeders' Cup Classic. Do you like that idea?
I don't mind it anymore. Back in the old days, it certainly would never happen. The Jockey Club Gold Cup at 1 mile and a quarter at Belmont would be the logical prep, although it has not been a very productive prep recently as it pertains to the Breeders' Cup Classic. I think you're going to get the money at 1 mile and an eighth, and then you trust Asmussen to get this horse to 1 mile and a quarter. Heck, American Pharaoh, he won the Breeders' Cup Classic after having not raced since the Travers. It's just the way it's done. I don't agree with it, but that's the way it's done nowadays.
Arrogate did the exact same thing last year as well. Travers, long layoff, showed up in the Breeders' Cup Classic against Elders. As far as Keen Ice is concerned, you kind of wonder how tight he was for this race, and maybe there's a sort of a bigger plan in play here for Todd.
Todd Pletcher understands that Keen Ice, unlike Gunrunner, is a true 1 mile and a quarter horse. I'm not saying, he completely backed off on him, but I wouldn't be surprised if Keen Ice wasn't 100% fit for this race. I think the goal after he won the Suburban were the 2 mile and a quarter races. The Jockey Club Gold Cup, which he legitimately has a chance to win if there's no Gunrunner and there's no Arrogate, and the Breeders' Cup Classic, where he would need a lot of help at Del Mar, a lot of pace, and maybe the big 2 not to show up.
The interesting thing, the final eighth of a mile for each one of the top 2 runners, Gunrunner 12:36, Keen Ice 12:32. So in a sense, as well as Keen Ice was finishing, it's not as though Gunrunner was slowing down. Again, we'll find out if a mile and quarter is really what he wants. Breaking Lucky, I like him. I think he's a really nice horse. I think Reed Baker's done a fantastic job. I don't think he's quite this good.
No, he's not. But it'll be interesting to see if Baker wheels him right back in the Woodward. Maybe the Jockey Club Gold Cup, although at a mile and a quarter against Keen Ice, I'm not sure that's his game. Preferably, I would get him away from Gunrunner as fast as possible. He's chased him in vain in his most recent starts, but he's a very nice horse. He deserves to get a win. He's just one of those in-and-outers, it seems, on paper.
The rest of this field, there's nothing spectacular in here. I don't think War Story is a decent enough horse. I don't think he's a superstar. If you place him in the right spots, he can take advantage.
Absolutely, but I'm sure Javier, after the first half mile on War Story, is saying, what are you doing, Paco Lopez, on Cautious Giant? The whole plan here is to go 46, so I'm lurking near the back of the pack and use my superior stamina perhaps to wear down a tired Gunrunner who's chasing enervating fractions instead of just basically moonwalking on the lead.
As far as Two Brutus is concerned, do you point to a race like the Marathon, mile and 3/4 on Breeders' Cup weekend?
They used to run the Greenwood Cup at Parks. I mean, I think that would be a nice spot, and certainly if they want to run him in the Breeders' Cup Marathon, the longer the better for this horse. But you have to utilize his speed in those races. Open up 3-4 lengths, as we saw in his first 2 starts in North America. I mean, he got run down by that Pletcher horse, Send It In, I believe it was the first time around, and he just got sick before the Brooklyn. So I'm not going to hold that race against him. But this, turning Two Brutus into a proper handicap horse, rating him off the lead, now Mas, mile and a half, put him on the lead against inferior horses.
Feet to the fire, not knowing what we'll find out what happens in 2 weeks. Feet to the fire right now, Gunrunner or Arrogate?
I'll take Arrogate at a mile and a quarter. I mean, when they made up, it's going to be in the Breeders' Cup Classic. And I respect Gunrunner. I mean, boy, this was one of the best races we've seen. But he also had an absolutely dream trip. Arrogate at a mile and a quarter, I think it's a tremendous advantage, the distance here for Gunrunner. Taking nothing away from Gunrunner. He's been nothing but solid.
Gunrunner, 5 shoes. Still wins the Grade 1 Whitney with a 112 buyer and a 133 time form U.S. rating.